Hey, Tom. How you
Hey
doing?
Michael, how you doing?
I'm well. Oh, God, I got to stop branding for Inkscape.
I bought this mug because it made me laugh because it's only half a mug.
Is this designed to keep you from getting whacked out on caffeine?
No, it's not. It basically, you buy it in the Maldives, so you spend so much money when you're in the Maldives, you can only afford
Today, as I recall, is a discussion of game theory and the application of game theory to proper accreditation of the value of an ad.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have a prop. I have a prop to explain the nature of the problem. Let's consider it. So let's say you're running a campaign and you're running on, say, 20 different channels. Yeah. So you've had, let's say, 1 million conversions that you've measured, and you want to know how you should apportion those 1 million conversions between the different networks on the different media you've run on.
And the reason you want to do that is you want to properly measure the effectiveness of the ads on each channel.
That's absolutely right. You want to give credit where credit's due. Okay. Right. So if this cake, which Jane has wonderfully baked, represents 1 million conversions, yeah, we can then start to cut it up. So let's say the first of our 10 networks, they say that they've had 200,000 conversions. Okay. So we'll give them 200,000. Let's say that the next one says they've got 300,000 conversions. We'll give them 300,000 conversions. So that's 2 of 10 so far. Let's say the next one says 250,000 conversions. Okay, so we're going to give them 250,000. Next one says 20,000. 200,000, let's do it. Next one says 100,000. And all of a sudden we're out of cake.
And we've only done 7 out of 20 networks.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. And so the reason that happens is because let me just
how is the cake, by the way?
Really good cake. Lemon cake. So the reason that happens is because people are exposed on more than one different network. Okay.
Right.
And if you look at it from the point of view of the network, sure, each of them might have seen, okay, well, 250,000 people have seen on my network and they've gone on to convert, so I'm claiming that credit. Okay, but the reality is you've only actually converted 1 million overall. So you need a way in order to be able to apportion the credit between the different networks. Now, this is quite a well-known problem in digital. And in digital, Google has the perfect solution, which is that you credit the last person who exposed the consumer before they...
Because it's usually them, right? Because it's usually them, so they want the credit.
It's always them. It's always them. So then that's the absolutely perfect solution. You credit the last person. It's always Google, because the last thing you do before you buy is you search.
This is the famous error of last touch attribution.
There are, absolutely. So there are multiple different ways you can do it. So for example, you've got first touch attribution, where you give all of the credit to the first person who exposed it. Last touch, you give all of the credit to the last person. Time decay, where the more recently you expose the person, the more credit you get. So there are always different ways people have made up. But the reality is that there is a mathematically correct way to do it, and that was invented by a guy called Lloyd Shapley in 1953. Lloyd Shapley, he worked with John Nash on game theory. They actually bunked at Princeton, I think. And what they were looking at is the problem of exactly how do you apportion credit in what they call n-player games. Yep. Mm-hmm. And what he did is he looked at it and he said, okay, well, what we want is we want something that it doesn't matter how you define the game. Okay, so for example, if you're going to give, let's say you've got an advertising campaign that's running for 6 months. Let's say we do measurement for the first 3 months, and then we do the measurement for the next 3 months. The result should be the same, whether we do the first 3, then the second 3 and add it together, or whether we do all 6 together in one go. He said it's got to be independent of how you define that period, so you've got to be able to add across it. Mm-hmm. He said it's got to be able to cover all of the value that's been captured by the campaign, okay? So that's called the efficiency axiom. And he also said it's got to only be a property of actually the campaign that's been run. So those 3 axioms, basically, which are known as symmetry, efficiency, and the law of aggregation. If you apply those 3 axioms, then actually you can mathematically derive the only way to assign value to each player. That's using the Shapley value.
And the interesting thing is how you define value is flexible, right? So you can say, I'm going to give 1 point for each viewing of a show in the case of a tuning campaign, or I'm going to give 1 point for a partial viewing and 3 points for a full viewing. Could you not?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Absolutely right. The Shapley value merely tells you how to aggregate.
How do you apportion the value as defined, regardless of how it's defined?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And so the math is there. You can see the math on the screen now. But what you actually do when you're calculating it is you look through every different combinations that people are exposed on, and you compare how well it does. So, for example, if you've got a certain conversion rate when people were exposed after watching CBS, Fox, and Home and Garden, and you've got a different conversion rate when they saw CBS and Fox, you can look at the difference in those conversion rates to work out what the incremental value that Home and Garden provided in that combination.
Right.
And the way you calculate it is you look through every single combination of networks that people could have been exposed on, and you calculate the incremental value of every network in every combination. So the problem with Shapley values is, although they're mathematically correct, they can really take quite a long time to calculate.
For example, how many combinations of ad views are there in an ad campaign that's running on 30 different channels and apps and websites?
Oh, it's over 1 billion. It's over 1 billion. So I mean, you need to go through every network. You need to go through those billions of combinations 1 billion times in order to be able to check all the adders and the differentials. So we've got some really clever computer science behind this, and what we do is basically we've got it so that previously you used to be able to calculate Shapley values maybe for about 5 or 10 different media. We've now got it that's working really well for well over 100. So we're routinely doing campaigns that we can report pretty much in real time with over 100 media on it. So that's quite cool.
So it's very, very cool. And the people we've shown this to are like, oh, wow, that's actually the right way to do it. But let's talk about what it really is. Let's bring it home now for people who are used to measuring ad campaigns and so forth, because we built this actually at the insistence or the request of a large customer of ours who had been looking at attribution reports, and they were kind of frustrated because the existing state of play in attribution has been to take each of the 30 networks and look at them in isolation. Your cake example, and so you would get exposed and unexposed on a given network, and they would show you incremental lift and would say, okay, hey, USA is doing great because you're seeing significant incremental lift. And that's okay, but what the Shapley value analysis says is, yeah, but let's look at USA as a team player. And when it's on the team, how do the combinations perform? And when it's not on the team, how do the combinations perform? And what we can see is there are networks that might have significant isolated lift, which are actually sort of unimportant in terms of their contribution to total outcomes. And the reverse can also be true, right? So some networks in isolation may appear to have relatively low incremental lift, but when we look at them as a team player, what their contribution is to final outcomes in the real world, because the real world is always a combination of efforts, right? Very few people only see an ad on one network, right? In the real world, that network is actually outperforming. And that's what we're now calling our approach to multi-touch attribution based on Shapley values, based on game theory.
Absolutely. And the way to think about those ones that underperform on their own but perform well together, it's exactly the same as someone who's giving an assist in the NBA.
Right.
The best players in the NBA are not just the highest goal scorers, they're also the one with the most assists. And what the Shapley value allows you to do is to take that into account when you're doing your multi-touch attribution.
But we have the case of the network that underperforms, and you say, hey, it's cool because what we're actually capturing are the assists, right? But then there's also the network that looks strong in isolation, but actually isn't that strong when we look at the combinatorial analysis. And I think it's what we would say is that's a network that has a lot of reach. So it's touching a lot of the prospects, but it's not that influential. It doesn't have that much conversion power.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
That's absolutely right. It's absolutely fascinating.
All right, cool. So Tom, excellent. Game theory as applied to understanding the true combination, the true contribution of ads in a large ad campaign.
Absolutely. There you go.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.